Have you ever felt like the world was against you? Like, no matter how hard you try, everything seems to go wrong? You're not alone. The story of David in Psalm 3 shows us that even when life feels like it's crumbling, God is there, lifting us up from the deepest lows. We often look at challenges and wonder if we're ever going to get through them. But the truth is, it's in these exact moments that God is most present, lifting us higher than we could ever imagine. Trust me, there's more to your struggles than meets the eye. And Psalm 3 reveals how God transforms the impossible into an opportunity for you to rise. Life has a way of throwing challenges at us when we least expect them. Problems pile up, people turn against us, and suddenly it feels like we're walking through a battlefield alone. But here's the truth. God sees it all. He watches as the world pushes against us, and He never abandons His own. Just because adversity surrounds you doesn't mean you've been forsaken. Quite the opposite. Sometimes it's in the storm that God's presence becomes most evident. Think of the moments when everything seemed to crumble around you. Maybe you lost a job, a friend betrayed you, or your plans fell apart. It's easy to feel like life is unfair, like there's no way out. But the Bible constantly reminds us that what looks like a dead end to us is just a detour in God's plan. He has a way of using even the worst situations to shape and strengthen us. The question isn't whether trials will come, they will. The real question is, how will you respond when they do? Imagine standing in front of a closed door. You've knocked, waited, and nothing happened. Frustrating, right? But what if, instead of a rejection, God was redirecting you to something greater? That's how angels work behind the scenes, guiding, protecting, and ensuring you reach the right destination. What seems like opposition today might be the very thing leading you to a breakthrough tomorrow. Faith isn't just about believing in easy times. It's about trusting when everything feels impossible. And let's not forget the people who seem determined to bring us down. Maybe it's a coworker spreading rumors, a family member doubting you, or even your own mind whispering that you're not enough. These attacks hurt, but they don't define you. The Bible is filled with stories of people who faced betrayal yet rose above it. Even Jesus was misunderstood, criticized, and rejected. If He endured it, why do we think we won't? Sometimes being attacked is a sign you're on the right path. When adversity hits, prayer becomes more than just words. It's survival. Have you ever noticed how much easier it is to talk to God when you're desperate? That's because trials strip away distractions and bring us back to what truly matters. When life shakes you, pray. Not just with routine words, but with the kind of faith that refuses to give up. Instead of asking, "Why me?" ask, "God, what are you teaching me?" Challenges don't break us when we face them with God. They build us. The beauty of struggle is that it reveals who's really in control. When we feel powerless, we're reminded that God never is. He is the one who turns setbacks into setups and obstacles into opportunities. Think of Joseph, sold by his brothers, imprisoned unjustly, forgotten. Yet, in the end, God elevated him to a position of power. If He did it for Joseph, why wouldn't He do it for you? Maybe what you're facing right now is just a stepping stone to something greater. And this is where Psalm 3 comes in, a powerful declaration that no matter how many rise against us, God rises higher. This psalm isn't just words, it's proof that even when the odds are stacked against us, God lifts us up. David wrote it when his own son turned against him, yet he still declared his faith. So what does this mean for you? Psalm 3 is more than just poetry, it's a battle cry for those who feel surrounded. David wrote it when his own son Absalom betrayed him, turning his people against him. Imagine the heartbreak. A leader, a father, a man after God's own heart, suddenly hunted by those he once trusted. Yet instead of collapsing in despair, David declared his faith. He knew that even if the world stood against him, God was still on his side. That's the kind of certainty we need today. How often do we feel like everything is falling apart? Bills stacking up, relationships breaking down, fear creeping in. It's easy to feel abandoned, like there's no one to defend us. But Psalm 3 reminds us of a simple yet powerful truth. God never leaves His own. Even when enemies rise, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, God rises higher. No betrayal, no hardship, no storm can outmatch His power. He is the unseen force that stands between you and defeat. Think of this psalm as a shield. When doubts whisper you're alone, Psalm 3 shouts back, no, you're not. When fear says you won't make it, this psalm declares God is lifting you up. It's not just words, it's a spiritual reality. Angels surround those who trust in the Lord, even when we don't see them. David believed this in the darkest moment of his life, and because he believed, he overcame. The same promise stands for you today. And let's talk about that key moment. David didn't fight back with swords. He fought back with faith. He didn't scheme or seek revenge. Instead, he cried out to God. That's the game changer. How many times do we waste energy trying to fix things ourselves, forgetting that the real battle isn't in the physical world? Psalm 3 is proof that victory doesn't come from fighting harder. It comes from trusting deeper. Prayer isn't a last resort. It's the greatest weapon. The most striking part of Psalm 3? David speaks as if the victory has already happened. He doesn't say, maybe God will help me. He says, the Lord is my shield. That's faith in action, believing before seeing. This is where most people struggle. They wait for signs before trusting, but faith works the other way around. Want to see breakthroughs? Start declaring God's promises before they manifest. Speak life over your battles, just like David did. Psalm 3 isn't just for biblical times, it's for you right now. It's for the single mother wondering how she'll provide, for the man drowning in self-doubt, for the believer facing attacks from every side. This psalm is a reminder that when you call on God, He answers. But here's the catch. You have to believe it. You have to hold onto His word tighter than your worries. It's not about ignoring reality, it's about choosing to see a greater one. And if you're wondering what this kind of trust looks like in real life, just wait. Because David's story didn't end in defeat. He found refuge in God, and through that, his life was restored. But what exactly did David do in his moment of crisis? That's what we'll uncover next. David's story isn't just history. It's a mirror reflecting our own struggles. Betrayed by his own son, hunted like a criminal, stripped of his throne, he had every reason to crumble. Imagine the weight of that pain. A son he loved turned against him, leading an army to destroy him. That's not just a political crisis, it's a personal devastation. Yet even in exile, David didn't break. He turned his heart to God, proving that real strength isn't about avoiding battles, but knowing where to find refuge. Most people would have reacted differently. They would have fought back in anger, sought revenge, or given up entirely. But David did something radical. He surrendered, not to defeat, but to God's plan. That's a lesson most miss. When everything crashes down, the natural response is panic. Yet David shows us another way. Kneeling before God is more powerful than running from the problem. His prayer wasn't a desperate last resort. It was a declaration that his trust was in something greater than his circumstances. Think about the times you've been betrayed, abandoned, or falsely accused. Maybe by a friend, a coworker, or even family. The sting of betrayal can harden the heart, but David's response teaches us something crucial. Our refuge isn't in people, it's in God. People change, circumstances shift, but the one constant is the divine protection over those who trust in Him. That's why David didn't just survive, he thrived. His enemies thought they had won, but they underestimated the power of a man who prays. What made David different? He understood that God sees what we can't. When others whispered, "There's no salvation for him," David declared, "But you, O Lord, are a shield around me." That's faith in action, seeing beyond the betrayal, beyond the danger, beyond the pain. While others looked at his downfall, David looked at his deliverance. That's the mindset shift that changes everything. Stop seeing the storm and start seeing the hand that calms it. And let's not forget, the angels of the Lord encamp around those who fear Him. David wasn't alone in that wilderness. Though he fled from an army, he was guarded by a force far greater. This is a reminder that when life pushes you into a corner, you're not standing there by yourself. When fear says you're finished, heaven says, not even close. The unseen battle is real, and those who trust in God are never unprotected. So how do we apply this today? When betrayal strikes, when opposition rises, when the battle seems unwinnable, do what David did. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening?" start asking, "Where is God leading me?" Shift your focus from the attack to the answer. Because the truth is, when everything seems against you, it's often a setup for something greater. David's pain wasn't the end of his story, it was the doorway to his greatest victory. But here's the question. How did David find peace in the middle of all this? How could he rest, even when his enemies were closing in? That's what we're about to discover next. Trusting in God isn't about ignoring problems. It's about seeing beyond them. David's life teaches us that faith isn't tested in comfort. It's tested in chaos. When the world turned against him, when he had every reason to despair, he made a choice. He chose to trust. That's what separates those who crumble under pressure from those who rise. The difference isn't the absence of problems, but the presence of confidence in God's power. Ever noticed how the moment you decide to fully trust God, life seems to hit harder? That's no coincidence. The enemy thrives on doubt. He wants you to believe that God has forgotten you. But faith isn't about what we feel, it's about what we know. David could rest even with an army chasing him because he didn't trust in his circumstances. He trusted in God's promises. And that's the real battle, shifting our focus from fear to faith. Think about it. When problems arise, what's your first reaction? Worry, panic, complaints? That's natural, but it's also ineffective. David understood something most people don't. Pray first, act second. He didn't let fear dictate his next move. He let faith lead the way. Imagine how different your life would be if instead of reacting in stress, you responded in prayer. That's the kind of faith that moves mountains, not wishful thinking, but trust backed by action. David's enemies were convinced he was done. They mocked him, saying there was no salvation for him. But what did David do? He didn't argue, fight, or beg. He prayed, and not just any prayer. He declared victory before it even happened. That's the kind of bold faith that changes lives. When you pray, do you ask timidly, or do you declare with confidence? Because the way you pray reveals the level of your trust in God. This is where most people get stuck. They want to trust God, but they also want control. They pray, but then they stress. They surrender, but then they pick up their worries again. David didn't make that mistake. He laid his burdens at God's feet and walked away in peace. That's the challenge for us today. Can we truly let go and trust? Not halfway, not when it's easy, but fully, even when everything seems uncertain. And here's the truth. Trusting God doesn't always mean instant change in circumstances, but it always means a change in perspective. David wasn't free from trouble immediately, but he was free from fear. He rested, not because the danger was gone, but because he knew who held his future. That's the kind of trust that transforms lives. The trust that says, even in this storm, I am secure. But here's a question. If trust in God brings peace, why do so many still live in fear? Maybe it's because they haven't fully experienced the power of prayer. And that's exactly what we'll explore next. Prayer isn't just words, it's the bridge between struggle and strength. David didn't pray as a last resort, he prayed as his first response. And that made all the difference. Too often, people turn to God only when they're desperate, but real faith means staying connected even before the storm hits. Imagine if we treated prayer like a daily conversation rather than an emergency hotline. How much stronger would our faith be? Faith-filled prayer isn't about repeating words, it's about speaking with conviction. When David cried out to God, he didn't just express his fears, he surrendered them. That's the difference between anxiety and peace. Many pray but still carry their burdens. But true prayer means placing everything in God's hands and walking away lighter. It's an exchange, your fears for His strength, and it's available anytime. Think about this. When was the last time you really prayed, and felt your heart lighten? Not a rushed prayer, not a distracted one, but a moment where you poured everything out and felt God's presence. That's what David experienced. He didn't just pray for survival, he prayed for renewal. He knew that before the situation changed, he needed to change. Prayer isn't just about getting answers, it's about being transformed. And that transformation is real. How many people wake up exhausted from carrying worries that God never asked them to carry? Prayer realigns our focus. It takes us from what if to even if, from I'm overwhelmed to I am covered. David was surrounded by enemies, yet he rested in peace. Not because his problems vanished, but because his trust in God was greater than his fear. But here's something most people miss. Prayer isn't just about asking. It's about listening. God speaks, but are we tuned in? Imagine if David had prayed but never waited for direction. His strength came from knowing he wasn't fighting alone, and the same is true for us. A prayer of faith isn't a one-way conversation. It's a divine exchange where we surrender, listen, and receive what we need. Some might say, but I've prayed and nothing changed. David would have understood that frustration. He didn't see immediate results either, but he didn't stop praying. Why? Because he knew that in the waiting, God was working. Sometimes the answer isn't a sudden miracle, it's the peace to keep going. And that peace is priceless. Prayer doesn't just change circumstances, it changes hearts. And when your heart is strengthened, fear loses its grip. That's why prayer is powerful. It builds resilience, renews faith, and restores hope. But what happens after you pray? That's where we see the true impact of divine protection, and that's exactly what we'll uncover next. Protection from God isn't always about avoiding battles, it's about winning them. David wasn't spared from trials, but he was shielded through them. That's what most people misunderstand. They think divine protection means a life without struggles, but in reality, it means victory despite them. The enemy may surround you, but he cannot defeat you when God is your shield. And that changes everything. Think about this. Have you ever faced a situation that should have broken you, yet somehow you made it through? That wasn't luck, that was God. Just as he stood with David, he stands with those who trust in him. The problem is many doubt his protection when trouble comes. But a soldier doesn't question his armor in battle, he trusts it. And that's how faith in God works. It's our armor, our defense, our unshakable shield. David understood this on a deep level. When he wrote, "But you, O Lord, are a shield for me," he wasn't speaking in theory, he was speaking from experience. Time and time again, when enemies rose against him, God was his refuge. And that same promise applies today. Whether the battle is external, problems, opposition, spiritual attacks, or internal, fear, doubt, anxiety, God remains the protector of those who call upon him. And here's the part that's easy to miss. Divine protection isn't just about physical safety, it's about spiritual strength. God shields not only the body, but the heart and mind. Ever felt at peace when you had every reason to panic? That's divine protection at work. When David rested, it wasn't because his enemies disappeared. It was because he knew he was covered. And that kind of security changes everything. But divine protection requires something from us: trust. A shield is useless if it's not raised. Many live in fear, worrying about the worst instead of standing firm in faith. David didn't just believe in God's protection, he declared it. And that's the secret. When challenges come, don't speak fear. Speak faith. Instead of saying, "I don't know how I'll get through this," declare, "God is my shield, and he will make a way." The enemy wants to make you forget who stands with you. He wants you to feel defenseless, exposed, vulnerable. But the truth? If God is for you, no one can stand against you. That's why trusting in divine protection isn't just about believing, it's about living with confidence. Walking boldly, praying with certainty, and knowing that no matter what happens, you are never alone. And when you truly grasp that, everything shifts. Fear turns into courage, doubt into faith, and stress into peace. But here's something even greater. Protection is just the beginning. What follows is a heart full of gratitude and a trust that only grows stronger. And that's exactly what we'll explore next. Gratitude isn't just an emotion, it's a mindset. When we understand that God is always at work in our lives, even when we can't see it, gratitude becomes second nature. David didn't wait until the storm was over to give thanks. He expressed his gratitude even in the middle of the battle. Why? Because he trusted that God was working behind the scenes, even if the victory hadn't arrived yet. And that's a powerful reminder for all of us. True gratitude doesn't depend on circumstances, it's rooted in trust. In life, it's easy to get distracted by the challenges, isn't it? We tend to focus on what's not going right, what we still lack, or what's still broken. But if we shift our focus, if we choose to see the blessings, the growth, the protection God has provided, we begin to change. David knew that the smallest victory was a reason for gratitude. Every breath, every moment of peace, every deliverance was a gift. So instead of waiting for everything to be perfect, why not start thanking God for the little things right now? Trusting God means acknowledging that even the hard moments serve a purpose. David's life was full of trials, but every trial strengthened his faith. Gratitude shifts our focus from "why me" to "what's this teaching me?" It transforms obstacles into opportunities and makes us see the hand of God even in the mess. Instead of asking, "Where's my miracle?" start asking, "What am I learning from this?" That's where the magic happens. And here's something important to remember. God's timing is perfect. Just because you don't see immediate results doesn't mean He isn't at work. David knew that the God who protected him in the past would do so again. And that's what trust is all about. Believing that God is already moving, even when you don't see it yet. Trust is like planting seeds in the ground, knowing that, though you can't see the growth right away, the roots are digging deep. Gratitude has a way of attracting more blessings into our lives. Have you ever noticed how people who are truly thankful seem to have more peace, more joy, more contentment? That's because gratitude unlocks favor. God rewards those who trust Him, and when we trust, we open ourselves up to receive even more of His goodness. Gratitude isn't just an acknowledgement of what's good, it's an invitation for more of what's to come. But there's a twist here. Trusting God isn't always easy. It requires surrender, patience, and a willingness to let go of control. That's why, even in moments of doubt, we're called to remember that God is faithful. David, despite his fears and frustrations, never lost sight of who was ultimately in control. That's the kind of trust that leads to peace. When you rest in that, your heart becomes a vessel of gratitude, and nothing can steal your joy. And this is just the beginning. When you live with gratitude and trust, you open the door to even greater levels of faith and peace. It's not the end of the story, it's the gateway to something more. But how do we share this truth with others? How do we pass on this powerful message of trust, peace, and gratitude? That's what we'll talk about next. As you reflect on the powerful message in Psalm 3, ask yourself, do you truly trust in God's protection, even when the world feels against you? How often do you remind yourself that no matter the storm, God is your shield? If today's message resonated with you, take a moment to pause and express your gratitude. Embrace the protection and strength that God offers, and share that peace with those around you. Remember, trusting God isn't just for moments of calm, it's what allows us to face the storm with confidence. If this message has sparked something in you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you can continue receiving these words of faith and hope. Your journey to stronger trust and deeper gratitude starts today. Are you ready to embrace the protection of God and rise above your challenges?